Rebonjour sur une nouvelle vidéo sur la construction il faut et pronom il. So I've decided to combine these two together for this class or for this video just because it comes from the same dossier, lesson 1 and lesson 2. And il faut, you're mainly going to see that in writing. So we'll ask you to convey an obligation to someone or give an advice to someone who probably just started school or anything like that. So again, it's not going to be a sort of grammar exercise as you'll see with passé composé, etc. Pronom I, you might see that as a grammar exercise and a writing piece, just because, as you'll see in a bit, their function is actually pretty useful for many exercises. So without further ado, when do we use il faut? Il faut is actually from the verb falloir, and it's a very special verb because you can only use it with one pronoun, which is il. And il is technically it is, right? So it's an impersonal construction because, as you say in English, it is raining, it is snowing, it is nice outside, right? So it's the same thing here with that particular construction, right? So il faut, think of it as saying it is necessary, right? It is obligatory. I might have said that wrong there, right? So think of it as an obligation. Or if I were to say il faut parler plus fort, it is necessary to speak louder. Il faut apprendre une langue. Il faut être plus aimable. Okay? Another way for you to say the same thing is to use the verb devoir. So devoir here, it does not matter if you use only one impersonal pronoun, which is il. You can direct your verb based on the pronoun that you're using, meaning that based on the person that you're talking to, for instance. So if I were to use il faut, think of it as general guidelines as you might see in a museum, for instance, right? General guidelines that you need to follow in a general setting. Same thing with devoir. The way it's different is if you have a particular group of people or you're speaking to your mom, you're speaking to a friend, you can use devoir to mean the same thing. So the question is, can il faut and devoir have the same meaning? Yes, it can be used interchangeably. Okay. Now, one more thing, I mentioned that at the beginning of class. If you have a conjugated verb already, in this case it's faut and doit, etc., the verb that will follow, and most likely you will have a verb to convey your obligation, will be in the infinitive. All right. The reason being is if you already have a conjugated verb, the next verb does not have to be conjugated again. Because you need to know the conjugation of the verb devoir, which is somewhat irregular, I mean, it is a third group, I have this listed here for you, so make sure that you know how to conjugate this before you use devoir to convey an obligation. All right, so pretty straightforward. Think of il faut as it is, something that is necessary for you to do, right? The way that you might see that on an exam, again, it's in a writing piece. If you use both of them, you get more points, right? Especially if you conjugate them properly. You might see it as your friend going on an exchange to France, give them some advice. So both of them could be used there. Okay. All right, so now le pronom I. Le pronom I, as you'll see, is very, very useful. And with a lot of pronoms, there would be en, COD, COE, etc. You'll see that in a bit as the term goes on. They are used to make you not repeat yourself. And we love that, especially when it comes to writing, because you don't want to say, for instance, I go to UBC, I eat at UBC, I do everything at UBC, right? Like the UBC becomes very repetitive and then it can make your writing very dull. So instead of saying UBC all the time, you use I to say the exact same thing. Okay? So why do we use pronom? Pour éviter la répétition d'un lieu. Right? So it replaces a place. any sort of location that you have, and sometimes you'll know that it's a place because it has these following prepositions in front of it, right? Or simply you'll know that it's a place because when you ask the question where, où, okay, you will have the answer as a place. For instance, je vais à la messe ce soir. So let's just say I've spoken about the choir all day long, okay, and I don't want to repeat myself when I'm saying that I'm going to the choir tonight, okay. So what I do is I want to erase that part. You want to ask yourself, je vais où? As a response, you'll have the choir. And where do I place the E? That's another valid question. The E, the pronoun E, will always be placed before the conjugated verb. So if I don't want this, I will have the E right before the conjugated verb. And notice that here I don't have à la messe in that sentence because then you'll have double repetition, which you don't want because E is already replacing what's in red. Same thing here, you'll see this from class that we're talking about a country in Africa, right? So instead of saying that particular country in all of these sentences, it would be great for me to just erase all of that and just replace it by E. And where am I placing it? Before the conjugated verb. So I have découvrir, parler, faire. Pretty straightforward. The only thing you need to remember is, first of all, the reader needs to know what place you're talking about, right? So you can't just start with using E when the reader does not know what you're replacing, okay? Afterwards is for you to know that, ask your question, où, right? Which is hopefully being given in that context. Where do I place it? Before the verb. So let's take an example as to how you might see that on an exam, and that was from 2019. Il est installé à Toulouse, so we're asking you to take away the place and replace it by E. So right away, I'm going to ask myself this question. Il est installé où? Right, this is the famous question we're going to be asking for E. À Toulouse, so that means I don't want any of that, right? Next question is, where am I placing it? Before the conjugated verb. So the conjugated verb here is est installé, which is passé composé. So that would be il, make it simpler for you, y est installé. So then I don't need any of this. Second one, Hugo a passé son enfance dans la cuisine de sa mère. Again, where did he spend his childhood? In his grandmother's kitchen. Right away, I know that I don't need to be repeating that. Okay, so where am I going to be placing my E? Because obviously we need to replace it with something. And we place it right there with the E before the conjugated verb. Okay, so pretty straightforward. There are particular rules to it, but it's a very important concept to learn, especially for your writing. All right, merci beaucoup et à la prochaine.